Thank you, everyone. And once again, greetings of the day, and we welcome you for today's webinar, which is on integrating climate action planning with national level ambitions. And we're going to bring on some key learnings from Southeast Asia and India. Today, I'm being joined by my colleague Anandan and Ritvik, who is supporting me from the ALP Secretariat, which is located in New Delhi. Next slide, please. So today's agenda for discussions would be primarily working on how we are working with different cities and working with them about developing inclusive and ambitious climate action plans and different frameworks. And we would also hear from some of the representatives from the cities, how it has been benefited from these framework. I would initially introduce you to the Asia-led partnership, and then we would follow up with a discussion with our panelists, Jiwon Lee and Ronelle Martin, who is our Southeast Asian staff from ICLEI, followed by Soumya Chaturvedula, who is also from ICLEI South Asia. She would be presenting the CRCAP framework. My colleague Jiwon and Ronelle, they would be presenting their work on ambitious city promises, and they would be sharing their learnings from the different cities that they have worked in Southeast Asia. We then hear from our the Municipal Commissioner from the Rajkot Municipal Corporation, Mr. Chetan Nandani. Sir would be presenting to us and helping us understand how the cities can learn from each other, and they have been able to learn from the framework and how it has benefited them. We then open up the discussion to all our participants, and as an house rule, currently you are on the listen-only mode, but when we open up for the discussion, your mic would be unmute. You can raise your hand and we would unmute that person, and that person can ask the question to any of the panelists he or she chooses to. We would also have a survey after the webinar is completed. We request you to complete the survey and give us the feedback on the current presentations and the webinar, as well as how we can improve our services and the content of the discussions in the forthcoming sessions as well. With that, let me introduce you what Asia-led partnership stands for. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Asia-led partnership is basically revolves around the different communities of practice, and we have members from different organizations, specifically governments and subnational governments and individuals as well, formed around the 4 communities of practices. The next slides, please. Yes, so we have about 885 members, out of which about 600 individuals from 274 organizations, both working in private and public sectors, as well as non-governmental sectors. And through this memberships, they help us in designing and promoting the low emission development strategies in Asia. Through these members, we help different governments and subnational governments in coordinating and collaborating and partnerships around. And we share different tools and models and best practices and approaches through peer learning sessions such as this. And then we help to foster capacity building across the members and the non-members around green growth and low emission development strategies. We are supported by the Let's GP, which is the global partnerships hosted by NREL from US, and we have similar regional partnerships across Africa and Latin America as well. We encourage you to go to the websites. In different slides, we will be sharing the URL, or you can also go and search for Asia-led partnerships in the Google, and we encourage you to go through all our communities of practices. And currently we have 4 communities of practices around. First is about grid-scale renewable energy, clean mobility, NDC finance, and multi-level governance. Today's webinar is under multi-level governance communities of practice. The communities of practice actually encourages to learn from each other more about technical collaborations, and it also helps sustain engagements between different countries. We continuously helps you to access different tools and expert assistance as well. This is more a demand-driven exercise and a demand-driven engagement with you, wherein you can benefit by raising the issues that you face around the multi-governance or about NDC finance and clean mobility or renewable energy understanding, and we help you to reach out to the right technical assistance through a lot of discussions such as this. Next slide, please. Under the grid-scale renewable energy, the focus area is renewable energy and grid integrations with strategic topics such as energy planning, smart, intensive and enabling environment, and integration studies and renewable energy options as well. We have held a lot of in-person workshops in various time frame. In one of these is Asia Clean Energy Forum, wherein we always present our work. And we have national government, different ministries, regulatory agencies as part of our communities of practice, and there are about more than 50 memberships around from Bangladesh, China, India, Laos, Nepal, Philippines, and Sri Lanka, Vietnam. Similarly, the next communities of practice is on clean mobility, which is more about the transport and strengthening and operationalizing energy efficiency around public transport systems. This time, our focus is more about transition to electric mobility and talking about intermediary and public transport fleets. We have communities of practice which are participated by various national governments, various cities, in fact, and we have also various regulatory and technical research institutes, and over, again, 50 plus members from these countries of Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Malaysia, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. And we are also doing a lot of deep dive activities in the areas, in the countries of Sri Lanka and Bhutan. Quickly moving on to the next communities of practice, which is on finance. Herein we are dealing with blended capitals and green bonds. Very recently, we are going to host a workshop in New Delhi on blended finance and green bonds and green banks. The members are from various subnational and national governments dealing with planning, investments, and budgeting. We have 40 plus members, and the key members are across from different countries such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, Indonesia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Next slide, please. Yes. Now coming to today's communities of practice, wherein we are going to deal about the multi-level governance across the national and subnational integrations, and to focus more on NDC development, as most of the countries' NDCs are focused towards low emission and green growth development. But not citing out the adaptations, we are going to, our panelists are going to also talk to about the adaptation features that they have in their frameworks. We have different members, around 50 of them from different national and subnational, as well as private, and a lot of practitioners with us in these communities of practice, talking about how this integration that needs to happen between the national and the subnational government. We have specific members from Pakistan, India, Philippines, Mongolia, Taiwan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan under these communities of practice. And as my colleague Soumya, she's going to present the Climate Resilient Cities Action Plan. We are currently working in Kurunegala city of Sri Lanka and most likely to start work in Bhutan as well on this particular framework. Next slide. So about communities of practice, we focuses more on peer learnings and knowledge exchanges, such as the webinar that we are going to do today. This is the first online session, and we have selected this topic based on the priority shared by the members. We also have a lot of deep dive support. As I mentioned to you, we are doing this for Sri Lanka and Bhutan. Perhaps in the next session, we would come back to you how the work has been received in both of the countries. Topics for upcoming sessions can be selected by the group's interest. So we encourage you to participate in the survey where you can provide your responses for the next selection of topic. There are a lot of open discussions we come up with. We would keep you posted on those, and you can help us understand through those discussions what are the country challenges that there are for NDC implementations or vertical integration. And we also have plans for peer learning and training workshops under these communities of practice. As part of our sharing and learning activities, we do upload all learning resources, such as tools and frameworks. Whatever presentations our panelists that's going to present today would be uploaded in the website. Please feel free to access those and ask us questions. You can also reach out to the panelists even after the webinar through us, and they would be more happy to respond to you. We also have no-cost technical assistance through remote. You can access this. We call it REAL, and feel free to ask us any questions that you have about the particular topic, and we would have the technical assistance ready to support you. So instead of waiting further time, I would like to move on to the next agenda. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next slide. Yes. So now I would like to call upon my colleague Jiwon Lee. She is from our World Secretariat, which sits in Bonn, and she would be presenting along with my another colleague, Renelle Martin. She would be presenting the ambitious city promises work that we have been doing since hello.
Hello, Aditi. This is Jiwon from ICLEI World Secretariat.
Thanks, Jiwon. So please continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Bonn, Germany. As Aditi presented, I'm Jiwon from the ICLEI World Secretariat. I'm the coordinator of the Ambitious City Promises project, and together with Ranel, who is based in Southeast Asia Secretariat, will be presenting some of the key learnings that we have achieved so far through the Ambitious Promises project, more focusing on the multi-level governance aspects. So in the next 20 minutes, I will first explain like how we came up with the idea of the project, how we conceptualized it, and what was achieved so far through the lens of multi-level governance, and some of the key insights in developing inclusive and ambitious climate action plan. So the Ambitious City Promises was conceptualized in 2015 when the countries were putting together their intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, and there was already a forecast that this might not be enough to hold the increase of the global average temperature to 1.5 degrees, which is a desirable state. So our project concept very much addresses the gaps between how much it has to be achieved and the actual NDC's targets. As ICLE, as the local government association, we recognize the pivotal role of local governments in tackling climate change and advancing sustainability in cities. So we saw the big needs for ambitious climate action driven by the subnational governments that could close the gaps between the NDCs and the increase of global average temperature to 1.5 degrees. So our project focuses on Southeast Asian region, mostly Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. And we have Seoul Metropolitan as our mentor city, which I will explain more in the next slides. So Southeast Asian countries are experiencing unprecedented economic growth and urbanizations, and there's rising urban challenges. So those Southeast Asian countries, they're very much focused on adaptation, but at the same time, they also committed to reducing the GHG emissions, tackling also the mitigation side. So our project is there to support the NDCs of the mitigation side. So the project is funded by the Federal Ministry for Environment of Germany through its International Climate Initiative (ICI) program, and it was launched in 2017, and it will continue until June 2020. So as I mentioned earlier, the project's inspiration was drawn from the Promise of Seoul, which was launched in 2015. It is an ambitious and comprehensive climate action plan, and through this umbrella policy, Seoul committed to reducing about 20 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is quite a considerable amount and very ambitious. And one of the key characteristics of Promise of Seoul is that it doesn't only focus on certain topics like transport or energy, but it actually encompasses 10 different urban sectors, including water, and urban planning, so that it could also induce more interest from the citizen side. And one of the most notable things about the Promise of Seoul that the citizens were one of the key drivers of coming up with such ambitious climate action plan, and the local governments were providing more administrative support to their ambition. As you can see, about 1/3 of the citizens, participated in one of the many civic participatory programs that are under the Promise of Seoul and the GHG emissions target to 2020. They try to visualize it and try to communicate this more in an easier way for the citizens, saying by 2020 we want to see that each citizen could reduce about 1 ton of GHG emissions. As you can see here, for the 2020 goals, Seoul's reduction, the 20% of Seoul's reduction target is actually coming from the citizens' action. So what we learned from Seoul's experience is that there is so much that the local governments can do, and to raise the level of ambition, they should be starting to engage the citizens and trying to also capture their actions in their own climate action plan. And through this, looking through the multi-level governance lens, this would also increase the multi-level governance function of the local authorities by bringing in the citizens and also bridging them with the national government. And the ACP project adopts the Green Climate Cities process that was developed by ICLE. I'm sure Somia will also mention the GCC program more on the adaptation side, and this and the ACP project is more focusing on mitigation. For the ones who are not familiar with our GCC program, it's a 9-step process that is equipped with guidance and framework tailor-made to local governments. and especially this is geared towards for the needs of local governments when developing or integrating low emission development strategies. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to share with you all the different achievements or learnings that we have done so far, because we want to focus more on the multi-level governance. But just to give you a quick snapshot of what the project activities, the major output of the project is, of course, to develop a concrete climate action plan that is actionable and that has a strong implementation potential, and we call this the City Promise, drawing on the inspiration from Seoul Metropolitan Government. And to really connect with the citizens' work and activities, we're developing a pledge platform to ensure that the actions are captured, the actions from the businesses and the households are captured and we could start calculating their potential GHG emissions reduction, and that could be fit into the local government's climate action plan. And having Seoul Metropolitan on board as our mentor city was very instrumental so far. For instance, we just had our joint project meeting last week in Manila, and Seoul was there, and it was so remarkable to see that there is a lot of potential from peer-to-peer learning, as the cities are the best ones to understand and to also provide inputs on how some of the activities can be actually operationalized in the framework of local governments. So we are benefiting a lot from the involvement of Seoul Metropolitan Government. In March this year, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of Paranoia Dialogues. We were able to conduct 3 cities and regions Paranoia Dialogue in all of our projects countries. As you may be aware, Paranoia Dialogue is a series of in-country climate consultation. We're also trying to strengthen the dialogues between the national and subnational governments, mostly to strengthen the NDCs, and this is being discussed, and the results are being discussed now in Katowice at COP. And the cities and regions Paranoia Dialogue, this is something that is driven by ICLE and other LGMA constituencies, which opens the channels for sharing resources, knowledge, and responsibility across governments. And this is also a powerful tool for the local governments and the nations to raise their ambitions of the NDCs and to really understand how this could be implemented. So the key lessons learned from conducting 3 cities and regions Paranoia Dialogues was that despite the strong role of local governments in implementing the NDCs, their role is not always mentioned in the NDCs. So based on our studies, about 40% of the cities of the NDCs do not mention the local governments or have limited roles written there. And we see a lot of needs of including the cities in the NDCs, because NDC that reflects the reality, the real situation of all levels will be more attainable and targeted than the one that does not. And the Paranoia process has also revealed a lot of communication and policy gaps, and we also realized that the national governments needs more on up-to-date pictures, and for this there should be more well-established data aggregation platform, which at the moment is not well established. And having different forms could quite confusing. It could also cause delay in developing the national policies. And this is something that my colleague Ranel will give some examples in his next slides that will be upcoming. So this is the the overall framework of the ambitious city promises. And I would like to hand over to Ranel, who will be explaining other multi-level governance activities that are done locally.
Okay, thank you, G1. Next slide, please. Hi. Okay. So as my colleague mentioned, as G1 mentioned, I will be zeroing in on the country's specific interventions that the ACP project has been implementing following the lessons learned from the Paranoia Dialogues conducted until March. I will be specifically discussing the case of Jakarta, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So for this one, let's go first for Indonesia. We organized a knowledge management forum with the theme multi-level governance in achieving the nationally determined contributions in Indonesia. And this event was actually done in partnership with APECSI, or the Association of Indonesian Cities, in collaboration with Bogor City Government. The Knowledge Management Forum is originally an annual event organized by APECSI, and since its inception in 2013, the forum has been bringing together cities to discuss, share, and learn from each other's initiatives to address climate change. So for this year, the topic was on multi-level governance. And results of this forum are addressed in the National Working Meeting of APECSI, helping to report inputs on improving national, provincial, and local policies concerning climate change. For this year, the forum was attended by 25 representatives representing provincial, cities, and regency governments in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So the Knowledge Management Forum showed us different challenges as well as needs experienced by subnational governments in Indonesia. First and foremost, one of the challenges identified is that there have been lack of consultations on climate action planning related processes, such as the formulation of greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And there are also difficulties in terms of data collection among ministries, primarily because there is lack of vertical and horizontal integration. In terms of the needs in order to address this challenge, cities were saying that they needed comprehensive guidelines in order to use existing online platforms for climate-related data. So as a background, in Indonesia, there are already existing national platforms, which we hope can also contribute to the multi-level governance discussion vis-a-vis low emission development planning. So this include the ScienceSmart, which serves as the national MRV system. And this is being managed by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And the other one is PEP-PPRK, which provides data and monitoring as well as evaluation processes of climate change mitigation strategies managed by their National Planning Agency, or BAPENAS. So from the project's end, we are ensuring that discussions are happening between the cities, the subnational governments, and the national governments to ensure that climate actions being done at the local level are reported and documented properly in these systems. During the forum, subnational governments also agreed that they will be improving staff capacity and also support the establishment of climate change working groups. In addition, cities also stress the need to craft policies that mandate provincial and city governments to formulate measures addressing climate change, including reporting of local level greenhouse gas emissions. Lastly, and this brings me to the second need identified, the city governments emphasize the need for a vertically structured climate change working group, which can serve as a secretariat convening relevant sectoral departments. So recognizing that climate data is coming from different sectoral departments, sectoral units, there is a need for this structure, which will kind of serve as the convener or integrator of all this relevant information. Next slide, please. During the said event, DKI Jakarta, which serves as the model city of this project, has been serving as inspiration to other Indonesian cities by presenting what they are doing in terms of low emission development. In Indonesia, they have a local action plan on GHG emission reduction called RAD-GRK, and DKI Jakarta's RAD-GRK states that they intend to reduce 30% of their GHG emissions by 2030. So this commitment is in accordance with a regulation duly signed by their governor, and this was further strengthened with sector-specific issuances such as Governor Regulation number 38 on green buildings, which aim to reduce emissions from the building sector, primarily from the energy sector. Next slide, please. So after this city-to-city dialogue, which happened during the Knowledge Management Forum, the next step done by ICLEI to kind of accelerate the process is to have a specific city-to-province Talanoa dialogue, which was organized just last month. So this is a continuation of what happened in July, and this provided a platform for selected cities and regencies to really have a transparent way of communicating their concerns with their provincial government. And this activity outlined several actionable recommendations on climate action planning with specific action points for the different levels of the government, such as the national, provincial, and local government. So at the moment, the link between the national the link on climate action planning is actually with the national and the provincial government. So in principle, provincial governments should be the one directly consulting the cities and regencies when we talk of climate action planning. But what we have learned is that usually consultations are not tend to not be inclusive and are not able to capture all the issues and concerns of the city government. So what we are trying to achieve now is to kind of have a platform where cities can also bring out their concerns to different levels of government, to both provincial and national. And so this brings us to the next step where we would be organizing a national, provincial, local dialogue in early 2019 to kind of bring together all the recommendations, all the outcomes of previously completed dialogues. So next slide, please. So from Indonesia, we head over to the Philippines, where I will be presenting the first National Project Advisory Group, or NPAG, meeting conducted under the project. So as a background, the National Project Advisory Group is envisioned to strengthen integration of low-emission development strategies at the local level. And the group will also provide technical and policy advice on the alignment of plans and projects pursued by the 3 project cities in the Philippines with the national government's priorities. Lastly, we also hope to create synergies and broaden the project outreach through this special body. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you the timeline of setting up the National Project Advisory Group in the Philippines. So as you can see, setting up and the mobilization took about 6 months, and then we finally had a national meeting by August. The members of the National Project Advisory Group are 5 national government agencies and 2 development partners. So from the 5 national government agencies, 3 of which are sectoral, including the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, which also serve as the project's main political partner in the Philippines. There are 2 cross-cutting agencies, namely the Department of the Interior and Local Government, which is responsible for the overall implementation of local level activities, and the Climate Change Commission, which serves as a sole policy-making body in the country when we talk of climate actions and initiatives. The 2 development partners are UN Habitat and the League of Cities of the Philippines. Apart from that, we have also included as ex officio members the 3 project cities in the Philippines, namely Pasig City, Marikina, and Parañaque, all of which are part of the Metro Manila. And the idea is that we want this advisory group to serve as a way for the cities to also bring their concerns to the different national government agencies as well as development partners. Next slide, please. This special body, the National Project Advisory Group, we have tried to provide specific roles for each member, bearing in mind their respective mandates. So for example, with the Climate Change Commission, we requested them to provide technical guidance on the use of the GHG inventory quantification support spreadsheet, which the cities will be using in terms of calculating their GHG emissions. We were also hoping that they can review and verify the correctness and accuracy of the community level GHG emissions inventory reports that will come out from the project with due consideration to existing and recognized international standards. For the Department of Energy, we specifically targeted the division handling energy efficiency and conservation because we wanted to build capacities of local governments in said area, specifically in terms of citizen engagement strategies employed by the national government. Another one is for one of the development partners, the League of Cities of the Philippines, is going to be facilitating the wider dissemination of project outputs. Since they have membership across the country, we wanted to be able to share the lessons learned from the project to other local governments who are not part of the project, hoping that they will be inspired to also adopt low emission development and come up with their own strategy or ambitious climate action plan. Next slide, please. In line with these activities that we are doing and that we will be continuously doing, some lessons have already emerged in terms of the multi-level governance. First one is that MLG should be anchored on a felt need of one or more level of government. Since we are trying to bring together and harmonize processes across different levels of government, it has to come from a felt need. And in this case, we are talking about local low emission development planning, which served as our jump off point to operationalize multi-level governance. Next one is that continued and continuous dialogues are needed in order to come up with concrete solutions. Now, from what we learned, not only from the Ambitious City Promises project, but from other ICLEI implemented projects, what we learned is that one-shot dialogues cannot often resolve long-standing and sometimes systemic issues. Now, we've been hearing a number of concerns in terms of, for example, data sharing or cross-ministerial coordination. Now, we recognize the role of civil society organizations such as ICLEI and other development partners to serve as bridge to ensure that there are platforms, transparent dialogues between these different levels of government so that eventually a concrete solution can be identified and implemented to solve the problem or issue. Lastly, we wanted to point out that the engagement of local stakeholders from the beginning of the process helps ensure that implementation of the subnational and national government's priorities are geared towards the actual needs of the citizens. This is something that takes off from completed public consultations, another project activity, which unfortunately we are not able to detail. But in a nutshell, for example, in the consultations held in the Philippines, there was a shift in terms of emerging priority sectors that were identified by the external stakeholders of the city. So from the initial assessment done with the local government, the sectors identified included air quality, energy, and transport. But upon conduct of public consultations, it became clear that solid waste management was also a very much relevant sector for the citizens and other members of the city, other segments of the city. So now we are looking at possibilities as to how this can be addressed, and we believe that once this is taken on by the city government, this is something that they would also have to look into in terms of having further discussions with the national government on how to further address the concerns of the citizens. Next slide, please.
Renel,
Yes.
1 minute more. Thank you.
Yes, this is my last slide, actually. Yeah, so we wanted to conclude with a quote from Pak Oswar Mungkasa, who is the Deputy Governor of Jakarta, Indonesia. And in one of our meetings, he was saying that as long as we continue these dialogues, I believe we have hope for addressing this urgent global challenge of climate change. So the cities and regions Talanoa dialogues that we have been organizing have captured inputs from an extremely broad group of stakeholders. And through this mechanism, groups which are not traditionally, in the climate action spotlight were able to contribute to the discussion. And this not only represents a just inclusion of people around the globe, but we also highlight untapped opportunities for climate action while contributing to the advancement of multi-level governance in a manner set out by the Paris Agreement. We hope to continue doing this in the next months and the remaining project life. And we are very much hopeful that through this, that the process that we are introducing now will be taken on by the cities even after the completion of the project. With that, thank you very much, and we hope that we were able to pick something up from our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Renel. It was definitely very insightful. And Jiwon, thank you to you as well. We hope to learn more about your engagement with the community. We would come back to you with those questions. May I request our next panelist, Ms. Soumya Chaturvedula, to present her presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world you're joining from. Aditi, am I audible?
Yes, thank you, Soumya. Very clearly.
Thank you. So today, just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Soumya Chaturvedula from the ICLEI South Asia Secretariat, based out of New Delhi. South Asia is responsible for implementing sustainable development initiatives supporting local governments in the South Asia region in line with our global mandate. Today in this webinar, I'll be talking about climate planning methodology called the climate resilience. As most of you know, is a organization of local authorities. We are based out of 22 offices and serve more than 1,750 cities globally, and quite active in the Asia region over now. Can I? Aditi, I'm having trouble changing the slides, please. Okay, now it's back. Okay, so ICLEI, through its mandate, now currently the mandate given to us by our members this year, we're working through different pathways. Our members are looking at development and, of course, equity and inclusivity. So all our programs are structured around these 5 pathways, and today I will be speaking about a program that we are doing in India. It's called Capacities, which is supported by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. The next slide, please. Okay. So traditionally, when we were talking of climate action planning, hitherto we are either addressing climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation. There were well read and well acknowledged definitions of what climate adaptation is and what climate mitigation entails. But now, from the work that we've done in cities over the last 15 years, we see that unless we are looking at both adaptation and mitigation together, and addressing resilience as a whole, it becomes very difficult to prioritize and implement actions in a holistic and integrated manner. And so, keeping this in mind, when ICLEI what previously Jiwon had referred to this climate action methodology for the green climate cities. It was initially focused solely on mitigation, and we had an ICLI-ASAN process that was solely focused on adaptation. But now, through this project capacities, we have now come up with an integrated planning methodology that addresses both adaptation and mitigation. The intent being that the project cities are now aware, have learned, and are able to deploy a climate action planning tool which addresses both adaptation mitigation and which prioritizes actions taking into consideration the benefits and co-benefits of both. Next slide, please. So I won't go into the green climate cities, which was the hitherto mitigation planning tool. We took this, and the next slide, please. And we took the GCC, we took the ICLI-ASAN process, which was more community engagement focused process on adaptation. We realized that climate adaptation requires significant inputs from the scientific community, looking at both climate trends and climate forecasting, but also equally important is to listen to the community and identify what they perceive to be indicators of climate change within their communities, and what they perceive to be solutions that can address climate change. Unless cities, urban spaces have this dialogue with the community, relying solely on the scientific information that we have will not help us achieve the scale of implementation that we would require. We are all aware that climate adaptation activities are not simply infrastructure measures that require significant community involvement. And one way to do that, to go through the process of having shared learning dialogues with the community over a period of time while we're trying to develop our climate resilience action plans. So the ICLI-ASAN process is pretty much based on this philosophy. And so now in the next slide, please. Now in the capacities project, what we have done is we have taken both these that I've shown you just now, the GCC and the IAP, and have come out with an integrated climate resilient cities methodology. This, we believe, is one of the first climate action planning methodologies which addresses both. This is a tool which is based on 3 phases, where local authorities look to analyze their baseline, look to see where they are at currently, figure out what climate change, what projections look like, what does the emission inventory look like, and then plan for their climate action, and then define their climate action plan, accelerate further on the ambition, enhance the ambition of the climate action plan in phase 3. So I'll go on to explain this 3 phases briefly, and we'll be happy to take questions later on. Next slide, please. Okay, in phase 1, which we call the Analyse Phase, basically what cities through this climate action planning process have realized that unless the community is fully on board and local stakeholders are on board, it is extremely difficult to make these kind of strategic changes city planning and community activities. And therefore, having a stakeholder committee is extremely essential. We have seen cities in India, for example, cities like Rajkot, from whom we are subsequently, cities like Thane, which have been consistently talking to stakeholder committees over the last 8 to 10 years. And this stakeholder committee only grows over the years, and is also a very active network that also keeps the city in one sense on its feet to address these climate actions, and it makes the city and is one way also for the city to report back to the community and be accountable for the plans that have been made. A climate core team is designated within the city administration, looking at multiple sectors. This is a multi-sector, multi-departmental committee. Many times it is not that the city is solely responsible. When I mean the city development authority is not solely responsible for all the utilities. There are other parastatal entities which could be responsible, for example, water supply, the solid waste management, energy provision, the distribution companies for electricity. It becomes important that all these different entities come together in a core team so that the targets that are made, the analysis that is done has buy-in from entities or the requisite official entities. None of this would fly and would be mandatory unless there is a strong commitment and a political will, and therefore having a mayoral announcement is something that is critical. Having the political commitment at the highest level is critical in order to ensure that the different parts move the way they should, and efficiently and in time. Also, while starting such processes, it is beneficial for cities to sign up to existing global charters and global commitments. For example, the Mexico City Pact or the Adaptation Charter and other relevant regional commitments. Right now, the flavor of the day is the Global Covenant of Climate and Energy, and a lot of cities are signing up in order, one, to, I think, keep track, mainstream climate action, and also to have a consistent reporting framework, so that this also becomes a way, because cities change political regimes, it becomes a way to keep the climate agenda ongoing across different political and administrative regimes. Given this background and given this kind of institutionalization of the climate action planning process, we move on to the actual work, which begins with defining country profiles, looking at climate change impacts and responses, and then doing a climate ready review. Next slide. Yeah, so like I said, the two aspects. So while climate action planning for both adaptation and mitigation, the institutional framework is the same, the kind of assessment that is required for both is a little different. From an adaptation perspective, we are looking more at identifying vulnerabilities of urban systems, where we look at the baseline of urban systems, we look at what is the current performance level. We also parallelly look at what the historic trends have been, any climate projection for the city or for the region, cities which are able to define these projections for their own jurisdiction and territory. That would be the best. Otherwise, cities depend on regional assessments. And based on this, the fragility of urban systems is defined. Risk analysis is done based on the likelihood and consequence of risk, and a vulnerability assessment is then prepared to inform the adaptation actions. Parallelly, greenhouse gas emissions inventory for all community level activities is developed. The Global Protocol for Community Scale GHG emissions inventory is used usually, that's called, in short, that's called the GPC, which is an internationally accepted protocol, is used to define the greenhouse gas emissions. So from next slide, please. So just to give you an example of what I just said practically, so you do a baseline, for example, the one that I've shown here is a water supply baseline. This is with regard to a city in India where we have service level benchmarks for the water sector, which are fixed by the government of India. So you benchmark that based on that, and based on that benchmark framework. Next slide, please. Like I said, we identify the climate risks. Is it increase in temperature, increase in precipitation? Next slide, please. Whether there is short duration, high intensity rainfall, or are we going to see a reduction in rainfall? All of this is defined by the climate projections. We do a baseline GHG emissions inventory. For example, this particular city looked at transport, emissions from transport industry, manufacturing, commercial, residential sectors. Again, this is aggregated by energy type. This is also disaggregated by for especially the municipal facilities, it is disaggregated by sectors as well. Next slide, please. Based on the baseline of urban system service provision, we overlay the climate projections, we overlay the climate change impacts on these urban systems and come out with fragility statements like, for example, I've shown here for the water urban system, severe water shortages due to indiscriminate use, no conservation efforts, poor management of non-revenue water, regulatory policies for water use. So this is the fragility from a sector point of view, from a sector service provision point of view. On this, you would overlay the climate impacts and come out with a climate fragility statement, where based on the status of service provision, if I add on the climate impacts, what is it that I'm going to see within that sector? So for example, here, we look at an increase in demand of water. There's going to be an increase in groundwater extraction to meet growing needs of water demand. There is going to be an impact on economy and on health because enhanced groundwater extraction without treatment through the municipal system would have significant impacts on health. So for each of the systems, you would do this kind of an analysis and then come out with a risk statement based on the likelihood of the occurrence of the fragility. And based on the consequence, you would identify the risk to be either extremely high. Next slide, please. And then for each of the wards in one city, we identify the high, medium, low risks. We prepare maps for every sector. Next slide, please. And the city then comes out with a hotspot map, basically overlays the fragility of all urban sectors and identifies the vulnerable hotspots. So these hotspots that you see in red here are those wards which have more than 5 fragile urban systems, which are serviced by more than 5 fragile urban systems. So this vulnerability hotspot map then helps the cities prioritize where their immediate needs to be focused at, and if there are limited resources, what should be the priority for finances for which project and where. So these kind of maps are extremely useful and beneficial to cities. Next slide, please. Yeah, so once this kind of a baseline analysis is done, we move on to the exciting part of it. The phase 1 is the nitty-gritty, is somebody needs to just put their head down and do all this kind of an assessment. Phase 2 is where it gets exciting for the city in the sense that this is where we identify the specific resilience interventions, we detail the climate action programs, figure out where the financing is going to come from and what the monitoring frameworks need to look like. Next slide, please. Once the climate action plan is prepared by identification of resilience interventions, I will just show you quickly a few examples. We also go back to, the city goes back to the stakeholder community, engages with them, discusses with them on the list of priority actions, especially where the community needs to be involved and community actions are required. It is extremely essential for the city to get back to the stakeholder community in order to secure buy-in and also ensure that targets are met. And then the city decides, depending upon the innovative project or depending upon the risk that is involved in undertaking new projects, cities decide whether they want to go the pilot project route or they have large-scale financing already through any of the government schemes, programs, or through public-private partnerships and market-based mechanisms. Next slide, please. So just to give you a brief example of mitigation measures, you look at renewable energy, look at revenue reduction in water supply, energy efficient water plants, solar parks, replacement of diesel vehicles with electric vehicles, provided, of course, the electricity clean, charging infrastructures, rooftop solar systems, ground-mounted systems, looking at solar PV deployment, area, land is a major issue in cities for solar PV deployment, and so we look at it. Do we use rooftops? Do we use dump sites? Do we use canals on which we can put solar PV? So, these are assessments and decisions. Slide, please. Similarly, on adaptive measures are both soft measures, hard measures. Soft measures in terms of policies, for example, pricing policies. I know that this is a major issue in South Asia and Southeast Asia is the pricing policy of water. Looking at available resources, looking at what is available, how long will it sustain the demand, what kind of conservation measures are required. Looking at urban flooding, again a major issue in our regions. Doing rainwater harvesting versus groundwater recharge, dual recycled water. These are some of the adaptation measures that cities are typically in the water sector. Next slide, please. So once an action plan is prepared, the action plan is then, of course, first communicated to the stakeholders, discussed with them, finalized, ratified by the governing council of the local authority, and then it goes into play for implementation for each of the projects that are identified. Monitoring, reporting, verification methods or monitoring and evaluation methods are defined, and the core committee is responsible for reviewing and reporting periodically on the implementation of the action plan. So there is a huge institutionalization process that is required, that is defined, and the action plan is then implemented. Once this action plan goes into implementation, equally important is then not forget about it, but to keep reviewing it. Action plans are typically 3 years to 5 years in time frame, and what we realize is one of the strong ways to enhance ambition and to mobilize local action is to collaborate. To collaborate horizontally, talk to other cities, learn from them, look back at our own programs, create ambition in other cities, and then vertically integrate also to showcase and to ensure that what is being done locally is in line with national priorities. My colleagues previously talked about vertical integration, multi-level governance. It goes two ways. One is to showcase local action, and two is to ensure that local action is in line with national priorities. So these are basically the two main considerations when we talk of vertical integration. International networking, super important, especially we see that this brings in also a lot of technical support, financial support that cities require for implementation of their action plans. Once the climate action plan period is through, there is definitely a review and an upscale of the climate action plan. We revise the CRCAP, identify new sectors, priorities, actions, whatever they may be, and always moving on with enhanced ambition. And cities also, for all the hard work that local authorities and cities put in, it is always great to benchmark ourselves against international performance, and also to kind of shine the light on innovative actions that cities are taking. So there are programs and mechanisms like, for example, the OPCC, which was the One Planet City Challenge, where cities showcase what their emissions inventories are, what their ambitions are, what have they achieved, and based on this they are recognized nationally and globally for their climate leadership. So all of this fits into phase 3 of the climate action planning process, which is accelerate. As important as it is to go through the planning and implementation, it is equally important to go out there and report and to enhance our own ambitions for future work. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think I'm done with this. Yeah, just my last slide, just to give you an overview of the different types of tools that are available to support this action planning process. The Green Climate Cities, which was the either two methodology, now the Climate Resilient Cities methodology, the combined methodology. We have greenhouse gas emission tools from ICLEI, the ClearPath and Heat Plus. Both are available online and can be explored by cities. There is reporting on the Global Covenant of Mayors platform through the online tool called Carbon, which is also managed by ICLEI. There's guidance on solutions, our Solutions Gateway, the Eco-Mobility Program that ICLEI has, the District Energy in Cities Initiative, depending upon the topic that you're interested in. There is guidance on different solutions that's available. And the most important thing, I think, after all this climate action planning process is the financing for the large-scale projects. And we have the Transformative Actions Program, which is a platform which helps cities define viable, financially well-structured projects, which then through the program we are able to take to international financing agencies and trying to match make between the pipeline that exists with the cities and the finance that lies with the international financing agencies. So the TAP program does that bit of matchmaking, and all of this is offered by ICLEI offices worldwide. I think I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Soumya. That's very insightful presentations, and we learned a lot about how you have been engaging with different cities. And luckily we have respected Mr. Chetan Nandani, Deputy Commissioner from Rajkot, and Rajkot has been a part of the Capacities Project. So I welcome you, sir, to share your views on today's topic of multilateral governance and climate action planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sorry, my throat is not well. I'll be very brief.
Thank you, sir.
Rajkot. Rajkot is a small city with 10 lakh less population. It's situated in the western part of Gujarat. Traditionally, we have a water crisis since last 3 or 4 decades. Hence, we are probably more aggressive for climate action because we know what happens due to it. Basically, 3 things have been on our focus areas. One is solar. Solar, again, we have 2 approaches. One is we do it by ourselves. Number 2 is we incentivize others to do it by law. Hence, Rajkot, majority of the houses have solar PV systems on the rooftops, and that is basically mandated by law. Number 2, we ourselves have created. In fact, we ensure that each and every space available in the premises owned by us is basically having a solar rooftop, and we try to ensure that very office is self-sufficient in energy. Second is conversion of LED lights. That also we have done it. We did not go for any pilots or something. We have all, in fact, we have just replaced them. Third would be water recharging. That is also being upscaled. Transport sector was initially a challenge, but now because of, in fact, we have outsourced, we have created a special SPV for transport, and because of the new model, better vehicles, better systems are in place, which indirectly reduce the emissions. Even housing, we have some baby steps. Probably we had a design carried, and now we have come out with a new design for housing. Probably that is showing results, and probably those baby steps will probably improve the scenario of affordable housing sector as a whole. I hope I'm clear now because of bad throat. Hope I could.
No, sir, we can hear you. Please continue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So probably these were the few things which we had. In fact, water again we have started with a pilot of a 24/7 water supply. That is almost on the verge of execution. Probably if that is done, we'll be replicating it throughout the city. That's all from my side.
Sir, and thank you for joining even when you're not in good health, and we hope you recover soon. Thank you for sharing your views. We would now like to open up the discussions to all our participants, and we would request the participants to one by one introduce themselves so that we have more understanding of who you are and what could be your look forward to this discussion. So we will unmute you one by one, maybe alphabetically order, and request you to introduce yourself. That would be really wonderful. Can we unmute Mr. Cheng Ting Lin, please?
Cheng Ting, you're unmuted. You can please speak up. Maybe we can move on to next person. Estrella Chen.
Yes, please.
Can you hear us? You can please introduce yourself.
What we can do is, we understand that some of our panelists need to move as quickly as possible. Can I quickly ask some of the question, and then perhaps both Soumya and Mr. Chetan Nandani would have to leave. Soumya, would you have a couple of minutes with you?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just to ask one. Yeah, just to ask one question, Soumya. Very wonderful to understand the detailed framework that you shared with us. We want to understand what is the timeline that it takes to implement this, and can the cities go in on their own, or do they require some kind of external support?
Yeah, thank you. So typically based on experience, this process takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months, even to an year, depending on whether the city is doing it the first time or this is a iteration of what has been done previously. It is possible for cities to do this on their own, but in the second iteration, not in the first iteration, because of the tools that are available and who would understand it is possible for cities.
Soumya, I think we got cut off from your voice. So maybe I would quickly go on to Mr. Chetan Nandani. I know your throat is not well, but a quick question to you. How do you think it has the CRCAP framework or this engagement with you has helped you move your agenda forward in climate action? So up to you.
It definitely helps in basically creating focus, and secondly in execution, as Soumya rightly said, action, then acceleration, and then reward. So it develops positive cycle, frankly.
Thank you very much, sir. So that's quite encouraging, and I hope the other cities would also be picking up the encouragements that you're shown about engaging, defining the right things correctly with the help of partnership with ICLEI and of course the next step forward. May I again go back to the attention?
So the attendees can use the raise the hand option. So we
Sorry,
the last question. And in the meanwhile, Soumya, I have one question to you. So what is the prerequisite of a city to be able to adopt this CRCAP framework? So is that do they need certain set of skills, manpower, or some internal? You talked about stakeholder, etc. So scientific community consulting, all of it. So what prerequisite, if you can give some insight on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a prerequisite, but in the process of planning, these are various elements that the city will need to bring together. Like I said, if the city is embarking on climate action planning for the first time, it would help the city to seek technical resources externally, but very quickly build its own capacity through internal resources, so that this is an activity that can be mainstream and it does not become and is left alone as a consultant-driven exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. May I ask a question to Jiwon now, while we will wait for the participants to raise their hand. Jiwon, thank you to you as well as Renee to share the extended work that you have done in Seoul, and you said about 10 million Seoul citizens were involved. My quick question to you is that how do you find the engagement or with the communities? Is it easy or difficult? And what were the methods used to engage with them, both in terms of hearing from them, getting their feedbacks on different issues, as well as informing or raising their awareness on different aspects on the climate action? Up to you, Jiwon.
Thanks, Aditi. So the consultation process was not always easy because some of the local governments have not gone through, it's not really well institutionalized in some of the local governments that we're working with. So the first step we had to take was really to map out the different stakeholders and who are the associations we could really tap on in order to discuss specific topic. And based on the stakeholder map, we were able to identify the major stakeholders that we could work with. And for instance, in Pasig City in the Philippines, which is part of the Metro Manila, we are conducting about 10 different public consultations, zooming into specific sectors, for instance, waste, transport, and etc., and energy. And we also try to anchor the discussion, catering the needs of the citizens, because the citizens, and also trying to use the language of the citizens, because it doesn't really resonate with them if we tell them only about the GHG emissions reduction. So we really try to cater their needs. So the attention is there. I think what was a bit difficult for us was that not everyone is so much aware of the effect and impact of climate change. So there was a lot of needs for to provide more climate change related education programs and raise public awareness on climate change. So this is something that we would like to focus on in the next year, to really have some environmental educational program in order to receive constructive feedback, because we don't want this public consultation to end up as a mere complaint mechanism for the citizens. So this is the challenges that we face, but we're very hopeful that this will in the end integrate into the city promise that we want to develop.
Okay, thank you, Javon. I'll come back to you again. Maybe from our participants, we know we have people from Vietnam, and we have unmuted Tashring Tashi. I hope I have been able to take the name correctly. Please go on and raise your question. Can we hear the question from you? Hello, we are unable to see the question. Sorry, we have someone from Government of Bhutan. If you wish to ask a question, please. Okay, meanwhile, we figure out the question. Jiwan, my next question to you. We understand that you have also been interacting with different governments at a different level, and the last slide, or which Renee were presenting, was a very wonderful message that we heard from one of the participants in your project, that this discussion, this dialogue has to continue. How do you suggest that such kind of legacy can be left behind a project like this, which perhaps has to come to an end sometime? But how do such dialogues are left behind, and it continues on in its own? If you can reflect on that.
Sure, Aditi. So we are trying not to reinvent the wheels whenever possible. So we try to anchor our work on what has been already established in the cities and really gearing towards the needs of the cities. For instance, last week we conducted two civics workshops, which stands for City and Business Collaborator, which is a platform of ICLE, trying to bring in the business sectors and also trying to see how business and cities can work together in a more sustainable way. And one of the feedback that we got from Pat Otra, who was actually the one who gave us the code, is that such dialogue should not be done only once, but should be done continuously. So throughout the process, we're trying to have this type of civics workshop at least every 3 or 4 months, if possible. And we believe once this momentum is set up through the project, and the stakeholders that we are inviting would have a further relationship with the local governments, that this would be a long-lasting mechanism that will stay there. And we're also tapping the existing sister cities agreements that the cities have, especially with Seoul metropolitan government. Their involvement would not finish after the project, but this will continue because the sister cities agreement has been there for a couple of decades already. And we believe that through different mechanisms, our project's effect will be long lasting, even beyond it will go beyond the project period. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiwan. That's wonderful. We have a question from Bhutan, and Soumya, this is for you. As I understand that you would be also doing the work for Bhutan as well as we are doing for Sri Lanka in Kurunegala city. So his question to you is, could you please explain how it will be done in Bhutan and the deep dive work that you mentioned about CRCAP work? Soumya, can we have an answer from you? Okay, so meanwhile, as we
repeat the question, please.
Sure, Soumya. So, Soumya, we have people from Bhutan, and we have a question saying we would be working in Bhutan on the deep dive work on CRCAP framework. So, how it's going to be done, and when are we going to start on this?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. The Asia-led partnership team expects to be in Bhutan the end of this year, 26, 27, 28 of this year to kickstart the project. We would be helping the city to institutionalize all the processes that we talked of so far. We also envisage having technical resource on ground for a period of a month and a half, 2 months to kind of handhold the city through this process while we also support you from our Delhi office. The intent is to support you initially so that you are able to take on the technical assessment on your own in the next phase. So that would be the intent of our engagement there. We'd be happy to come and meet with you end of this year and discuss further.
Thank you, Soumya. I would now request if anyone from Taiwanese government would like to raise any question, Ho Ming Lau or Wang Shangweng, if you wish to ask any question related to the presentation that was done by our Southeast Asian colleague and South Asian colleague. Okay. Thank you. I think we have come to the end of today's webinar. It's already 2 o'clock our time. So we would now close this webinar. However, we would request each of you to take the handouts as we have posted here and also use our platform, Asia-led Partnerships platform, to reach out to us and reach to respective panelists with your questions or further queries if you have. With the close of this webinar, we once again thank you for sparing your time and we look forward to host you again very soon under this communities of practice. Or if you have any other interest, do let us know. We would definitely be able to discuss this topic. We would also close this webinar with a survey. We request you to participate in the survey and provide us as much as feedback that you can do and help us improve the content of our discussions and our outreach processes. So with this, once again, from the LP Secretariat, along with my colleague Anandan and others, I say thank you and have a good day. Thank you to our panelists as well, Jiwan, Renel, Soumya, and Mr. Nandani. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.